Hello, you are listening to an archived worship service of First Presbyterian Church, Columbus, Mississippi. Thank you for listening.
Last week we read the previous chapter of the book of Hebrews, that is, that beautifully written chapter, that rhythmic chapter, chapter 11. Every rhythm comes of the chord by faith, and the writer uses that rhythm to build a crowd that surrounds us. Last week we only read a small portion of that passage, but it keeps going. I invite all of you to go back and reread chapter 11 as the author takes us on a journey through our family story. By faith Abel, by faith Enoch, by faith Abram and Sarai, by faith the people of the Exodus, the people of the promised land. By faith Rahab and Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and the prophets. By faith the people in exile, the warriors and the women, the tortured, the mocked, the flogged. By faith the wanderers and those who will be killed. They all lived by faith, and this great crowd has now joined us in the hearing and the telling of this story. A great cloud of witnesses that helps us endure, that helps us remember, that helps build our story. Now, our brother in Luke's gospel might have been a part of this great cloud of witnesses by the time the Hebrew writer makes his great list. He's known simply, unnamed, as the beggar, the blind man of Jericho. Once he had seen. Once life wasn't like this, but now all he did was sit by the roadside, hoping that the travelers would take their eyes off of the rocky road that lay before them so that they might see him, pity him, help sustain him. Now, there's not much else that is known about this unnamed man of the roadside except this, that when the moment came, when his chance stood before him, nothing could shut him up. Jesus says, "Your faith has saved you." But he might as well have said, "Your loud mouth made it possible." He regains his sight, and he follows Jesus. And others that see this happen, they glorify God. Jesus saw him. Jesus changed him. But something else made all of this possible. Something else made him yell out. The man had hope. Now, about the time that this passage is written by the writer of Hebrews, there's another man named Pliny the Elder. He's a philosopher and a writer in Rome, and he writes a good bit about hope. He says, "Hope is the pillar that holds up the world. Hope is the dream of a waking man." The blind man woke up each day. He sat by the road each day. Each day felt like the last. He was faithful each day, and each day he came with a measure of hope that this day would not be like this tomorrow. With a faith that could do nothing but look forward. And that's what hope is. Hope is faith looking forward. Now, the writer of Hebrews is asking his community to remember, to look back. But he doesn't do that so they will become stuck in the past. you see what he does next. He doesn't build this big family tree to say, let's be stuck back there with Abraham or Isaac or Jacob. Let's hear their story because they surround us today. The writers of Hebrew is asking his community to remember he's planting a seed, allowing the roots to strengthen before the green shoot breaks through the soil. All of chapter 11 looks back, and then all of a sudden, chapter 12, he shouts, "Wake up! By faith, you look to a future that is running a race, looking to Christ. Faith, racing toward a future, a hope that gives perseverance." The writer asks of his congregation, what does the future hold for you, for us? What does a realistic, faithful look at life hold for each of us because of what God has done and is doing? Does our future look different? Are we healed? Are we strengthened, or are we left along the roadside of the world? Hope is the pillar that holds up the world. Hope is the dream of a waking man. The great pastor John Maxwell, who is a great writer but also the foremost thinker of leadership and leadership training in the church today, tells of a great story. Years ago, there was a small town that he knew well, up in Maine. And the small town had been proposed by the state government to be the site of a giant hydro plant to produce electricity that would extend hundreds of miles. The dam would be built across the river, and after that is done, the town would be swallowed. And once the plan had been announced, the people had time, almost a year, to relocate. But during the months in between the announcement and the construction of the dam, a funny thing happened. No improvements were made. Everything ceased. Nobody bought paint. Nobody bought duct tape. Nobody bought WD-40. There were no repairs made. Nobody worked on their home. They just put up cardboard when glass broke. There were no buildings, no new roads, nothing. Day by day, month by month, everything started falling apart. And finally, by the time the last day came, when the last people moved away from town, the town was already dead. Long before the water arrived, it was dead. One of the townfolk remarked in a local newspaper, "Where there is no faith in the future, there is no power in the present." Where there is no faith in the future, there is no power in the present. No future meant no hope. The people of Hebrews could have claimed the same in the harsh environment in which they lived. They had been ostracized from the community. They had been pushed to the margins by society. They had been shown the door by their own people, pushed away for their faith. They could have easily said, "There is nothing for us. Why bother?" The blind man could have shrunk into the hopeless abandonment. No one would have blamed him. Why come to the roadside every day? Life was pretty much over. The community had pushed him aside, outside of the gates of the city. He was no longer welcome in the synagogues because of his defect. He was pushed to the margins and told to be quiet. No one would have blamed him if he believed that there was no future. But the writer of Hebrews, the blind man that shouted by the roadside, said, there is a future here. Hope shouts, Jesus of Nazareth, Son of David, have mercy. And others try to quiet him, but hope cannot be made quiet. It is, after all, the pillar that holds up the world. It is the dream of the waking man. The writer of Hebrews shows a crowd to his audience, a crowd that does not attempt to quiet them, but encourages them to keep running, to finish the race, to move into that future. A future in which Jesus holds for each of us a hope. What does the future look like? Well, with hope, the future, our future, looks different. When we look to Christ, our hearts tune into places that change, places of hope. We see them all around us. We hear them with new ears. These places of hope. And we cannot allow a world to be swallowed up by darkness or fear or water that rises or even death. When we hope, Christ is still with us, around us, answering our call, saying, what would you have me do? One expression of hope that my eyes opened to this last week is the beautiful story of the refugee team. Have you heard about this? A team competing in the Olympics for the very first time ever, made up of displaced people from all around the world. They've come from the Sudan, they've come from Ethiopia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and from Syria. There are 10 athletes that meet this criteria as the refugee team. They play for no home. They fly no flag. They will hear no anthem played. There are no home fans. None but the name of the human family. The human family. Among them is a story of the 18-year-old young lady, Yusara Mordini. She came from Syria. She swam alongside a capsized boat in the Mediterranean for 3 hours, helping to save the lives of a dozen people, including her own sister, and now she's been placed with many other Syrian refugees in Germany. She swam the other day in Rio in the 100-meter freestyle. In her interview, she said, I want everyone to think refugees are normal people who had a home and lost them. Not because they wanted to, not because of their own fault. They didn't want to run away from home. They didn't want to become a refugee, but because their dreams of life, because of their dreams, they had to go. A lot of people in Syria have forgotten to dream. Hope is the pillar that holds up the world. Hope is the dream of a waking 18-year-old Olympian. Yusra stood up and shouted. She would not stay blinded. Faith has given you sight. What is it that you see? Faith has given you ears. What is it that you hear? Faith gives us hope that there is a future, that the future includes us, that the future is with God. So in hope, let us run the race with perseverance. In hope, let us look to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. In hope, let us lay aside all that would weigh us down or sin that clings so closely. Hope is the pillar that holds up the world. It is the dream of a waking people. Only by faith and with hope are we ready to experience joy. Next week, we come to joy and love. Amen and amen.